What's up, crew? Welcome back to Libertalia Game Supply. Today is release day for the new Fire King structure deck. And with the release of a new structure deck, as has been the case for the last couple of years now, because Konami has been making some decent ones, I, as well as many others, are now scouring the internet looking for the best way to build this new budget masterpiece. And so today we're going to talk about that. Now, this structure deck, unlike a lot of the better ones in the past, doesn't seem to actually come loaded with a whole lot of great ways to make it work just within itself. It does what it's supposed to do. It has some stuff that can kind of trigger what it's supposed to do, but it doesn't really do a great job of like getting you from an opening hand to a board that you can play with. And so building a 3 structure deck build out of this is kind of challenging just because you're going to have a lot of inconsistency because you don't have a lot of ways to search for the best cards in the deck to get the deck started. So like something like 1-for-1 probably would have been a good include here that just wasn't. And so things like that will be what we talk about adding on later. Now, even though that's the case, there is still a really solid core of cards. Essentially, all of the Fire King stuff that you could possibly need is in here. And so we'll go over what I feel is the good core to build around, and then you would add stuff in from outside of the structure decks from there. All right, so just for the main core of cards that you get out of having 3 of the structure decks, I think 2 Sacred Fire King Garunix is perfect. Having the 3rd is probably overkill. We want to be searching this off of Island to get the special summon of it right away, and then start using its other effects to set up our board. I think having a 3rd one of these would be worse than drawing into something else in most instances. Drawing it's not terrible because you can still resolve it with other pop effects that you have, but I think searching it's better. We've got triple Kieran. I think this is an easy 3 of. It's got that quick effect pop to special summon itself, so you can trigger effects. You can put it on the board pretty easy. You have the little bird to recycle each time, so you have like essentially a free pop to summon it if you don't have an effect to resolve. If it gets popped out of the deck, like by the Garunix, you can then special summon a Fire King from your graveyard or hand and then pop a card on the field. So it can be a removal for your opponent. It can be an effect trigger for yourself. So it kind of does everything that the deck needs. We've got triple Arvada. This is the only 3 of level 4 that I thought was necessary at 3. It's monster effect negation, so when it's on the field, it can quick effect negate a monster effect by popping another fire monster you control or in your hand. It's the closest thing that the deck comes to having like an in-archetype hand trap type deal, even though it's got to be on the field. It's pretty easy to summon it. It also has a nice float effect, so if it gets popped, it special summons a Fire King out of the graveyard, so you can pop it with like the quick play board wipe thing in the deck and get these guys back to make your big extra deck nuke or whatever. So it does a lot for the deck as well. For the other 4s, I'm playing 1 Barong and 1 Rangbali. They're both at 1 because they don't really do the most useful things, but they do summon themselves. So if something you control, a fire monster you control gets popped, they can summon themselves out of the hand. In the following standby phase after the Barong gets popped, it can add a Fire King from your deck to your hand, and so it can set up this little play here. The Rangbali, when it's on the field, does something similar to the Arvada that negates monster effects, except it negates spell effects. That's decently useful, but I don't think it's nearly as useful as monster effect negation, and so that's why it's at 1 and Arvada's at 3. And for your last 3 core monsters, we got triple Ponix. I've played around with 3 or 2 because they recycle themselves so well. I just think that, especially if you're going to be playing it straight out of the structure deck, you need this or the continuous spell in order to get the deck rolling at all, because this can search you the continuous spell. And so 3 of is going to be pretty necessary. I think you could reasonably cut it to 2 if you were to bring in a bunch of outside of structure deck cards to make it a little bit more consistent. But for now, 3 of is good. While it's in your hand, if a fire monster you control gets popped, this can special summon itself. When it gets summoned, it can search a Fire King spell or trap from your deck to your hand. There's not really good Fire King traps at the moment, but maybe someday. And then when it gets popped, in your following standby phase, it puts itself back in your hand. So that's what I meant when I said the Kieran gets a free special summon, essentially, is you can pop this out of your hand or off the field to summon the Kieran, and then your next standby phase, you just get it back, and you can just keep doing it over and over again. So endless loops, endless searches, endless tribute fodder for effects, whatever it is. So there's your main monster lineup. For our spells, we're going triple Fire King Sanctuary. This is a huge piece of the deck. It's what allows you to do the board wipe on your opponent's turn. So on activation, it can search Fire King Island. We'll just throw that out here. We got 2 Fire King Island in here. and it just puts it on the field, and you need this to really get going as well. It has protection for any card that you have on the field, so the island, your monsters, whatever, as long as you have a fire monster in your hand that you can pop instead of letting something get destroyed. And then if your opponent special summons a monster, you can trigger this effect immediately after the effect resolves, exceed summon a monster from your extra deck, a fire monster specifically, which would then get you into your board wipe nuke guy, the bigger Garunix. For the double island, it's really important for digging through the deck, especially in the structure deck. You don't have a ton of draw that is like super useful. You get trade in, but it's not as good, I don't think. The island is definitely better. So during the main phase, pop a card in your hand or field, and then you can add a Fire King from your deck to your hand. And because you would be adding the Garunix within the chain that the card is being destroyed in, you would then get to special summon the Garunix off of that search effect. So really, really good there. If you wanted to use its second effect, which comes up less often, if you control no monsters, you can special summon a Fire Wing Beast monster from your hand. So I suppose if you opened this and the Ponix and you didn't want to waste the normal summon because you had an Arvada or something, you could do that. It could special summon the Garunix as well. You know, whatever it is that you may be looking to do, but I think that first effect is for sure the better one. And then for just some secondary search targets for the Ponix, we've got Skyburn and we've got Circle of the Fire Kings. I like this a lot in here, and I like this too. I think you could probably bump this up to 2 if you're only playing with the structure deck, just because you don't have a whole lot of other quick effect, you know, interactable wiping effects on your opponent's turn outside of like Torrential Tribute and of course your extra deck monster. But this one lets you target Fire King monsters you control up to the number of cards your opponent controls, destroy all of what has been targeted. So that can trigger all of your monster effects on the board, which is really nice. You can board wipe with the extra deck monster and then pop the extra deck monster with this and then get 2 summons out of the graveyard. So you can get an additional follow-up after you've board wiped, so that's also pretty cool. And then while it's in the graveyard, if a fire monster you control be destroyed by card effect, you can banish this out of the graveyard to prevent it from happening, so it's got some built-in protection there. It's a pretty good card all around. Circle, I think, is good because it can trigger some of your pop effects that you would get, as well as being able to like dodge targeting effects. So if you have whatever on the board, we'll say we have a Garunix set here and you have this in hand on your turn or set on your opponent's turn, and they target this with an effect, you can pop that Garunix and replace it with something out of your deck, or out of your graveyard rather. Get whatever effect, dodge the effect that you are being targeted with. The Garunix summons itself off of a pop anyway, and so if you have any other way to pop a monster, you can summon it back pretty easily, you know, stuff like that. It also can set you up if you had like a level 8 on the previous turn that got destroyed and you weren't able to get to a second one, you can then still get to your extra deck rank 8s by just getting rid of something that isn't to put an 8 back on the board. So I think this is pretty useful. And then as far as the extra deck stuff goes, we're playing 2 of the Eternity and 1 of the Hida. I don't think, you could probably cut this down to 1. I'll probably leave it at 2 in pretty much any deck that I build with this, just because having the additional board wipe is kind of nice. And there's not really a way to put it back in the extra deck that I've come across at this moment, but this thing is pretty nuts. When it gets summoned, it wipes the board of all other monsters on the field, and then it also can detach to pop spells or traps and then gain 500 attack when it does so. So it can boost itself up to 35 or 4k if you were to do it 2 turns in a row. Or if you leave materials on it, because you really don't, I mean, maybe there's back row you got to kill, but if you leave materials on it and it gets destroyed, it summons Fire King monsters out of your graveyard equal to the number of materials it had when it got destroyed. So that's what I was referring to when I was talking about the Skyburn. You can summon this off of the Sanctuary on your opponent's turn to board wipe. If they still have ways to play through it and you were able to get the Skyburn in on the field, you would Skyburn, pop it to pop 1 card, and then summon 2 more back to the field. So it does a really good job of being a Fire King extra deck monster, I would say. And then the Hida is just because you have it. I don't think it's super necessary. You're probably not playing against a ton of, well, you might play against a few mirror matches now that the structure deck came out, but I think this could be replaced pretty easily for now just because it's there. We'll play it. Now, as mentioned, that was only what I consider to be like the main core of the deck. There's some other stuff in here that we're going to add in for like a 3 structure deck build, and I'll show you that next. And then we'll go over what I think are good potential builds that would require you to go get cards from somewhere else or use other cards outside of the structure deck. Now, this is mostly just a rough outline of what I think you can do, but really outside of just a few of the cards that are included in the structure deck, I think a lot of it you just scrap it and play something else. Luckily, because of Rarity Collection, we've got a lot of pretty decent staples that are now pretty cheap. So things like Prosperity, Lightning Storm, triple tactics talents, that kind of stuff that would have normally been not budget is definitely affordable now, and so that kind of stuff would be what you're going to add in if you just wanted to keep it pure. But here's the 3 structure deck build, and then we will go over some of the additional lists that I think you could work towards if that is ultimately the goal and you like the play style. So I think if we're just using the structure deck, you're probably going to end up needing to play the 3rd Garunix, just because you're probably going to need to play the trade-in as well, just to make sure that you can draw for the stuff that you need. Another good monster option out of the structure deck is the True King, the Fire True King. It's got a pretty decent effect on summon. It can pop 2 cards to summon itself, which would trigger effects. For whatever reason, Blaster is in the deck too. I think that's not good. It doesn't really synergize at all. It destroys, but it's a pretty heavy cost to destroy anything in general, let alone your own monster to trigger an effect. And so this is just all around better. I still wouldn't play more than one if one at all. You are given some decent hand traps in here, so we would have to max out on those unless you got some stuff in a binder waiting to be used. So triple droll because we got it. As far as spells go, we'll probably add in a 2nd Fire King Skyburn, just because it can trigger effects on your opponent's turn. It can act as some additional removal. Dark Hole is in the structure deck as well. I think that's less good unless you needed it to trigger, like if you're going first and you open something that you need an effect to trigger on, and it's your only way to trigger it is to Dark Hole yourself. But that's just a huge waste. You could also just set this, summon your whatever, and pass and do it that way, and it's still going to be a crap turn either way. So I think the Skyburn at 2 is fine. It's also searchable where Dark Hole is not. Double tanky. It's good for deck thinning. It's good for getting to your Arvada, your Barong, and your Rangbali. A lot of times you're going to put something in your hand as like pop fodder for a different effect that you can plus off of. So I think Tenki is nice for that regard, thinning the deck and getting your hand set up to be positive. Triple trade-in, we're playing 6. If you play the 3rd Garunix, you're playing 6 level 8s. So you could probably cut this to 2. Or find a way to fit another level 8 in there. I think you have like the Coach King guy is a level 8. It just doesn't fit in the deck all that well, in my opinion. And I think you need the draw because you really need to get to your Ponix or your Sanctuary turn 1 as quick as possible to set up the deck engine really rolling. And so the trade-in is what we got. And triple rekindling. This one, I probably wouldn't play this in the deck outside of just being in the structure deck. It special summons from your graveyard as many fire monsters as possible, 200 defense. And that is all of the Fire Kings other than Garunix. The rest of them have 200 defense. And then it banishes them in the end phase. So the idea would be that you rekindle them back and then extra deck summon with them so you don't lose them all. But if you don't do that, you lose everything and it's just not that good. And so for the purposes of it just being 3 structure decks, I think rekindling is fine. You're going to have to play all of the extra deck monsters that you get that aren't very good anyway. And so you can make some use of them, but otherwise I would cut this pretty quick and replace it with something more useful. And then for our traps, we've got the triple Imperm, really nice reprint there, and triple Torrential. You could also play like Judgment or something you get in here. The Imperm's just, it's a good card, you gotta play it. And then the Torrential would be similar to all of the other board wipes on your opponent's turn. You would, like the Skyburn or whatever, you would just set it, leave your monsters that plus off of the pops, Torrential yourself, whatever. And we probably don't need to talk about the extra deck because you only get so many extra deck cards, but you got triple Eternity, triple Giant Trainer, triple Diamond Dire Wolf, and triple Hida. These I think are not very good in the deck. The Diamond Dire is a lot of cost for 1 pop, and it doesn't trigger your own pop unless you're popping your own card, and so that'd be 3 cards to essentially trigger 1 effect. For yourself, and that's just not worth it at all. There's just better removal cards if you were looking to pop your opponent's stuff, so I would cut that. Giant Trainer is a good card. I think if you were playing like Horus in here, which is going to be very much so the opposite of a budget deck, you can make good use of the Giant Trainer to really help set up your board. But in this build, or in really any type of cheaper Fire King build, you don't really spam level 8s outside of the 2 to make the board wipe guy, and so I just don't think you could leave it in at 1 just until you were able to replace it with something else, but this is not very good in this deck. And then the Eternity, 3 is probably too many, but if it's what you got, it's what you got. It's your best extra deck card by far out of the selection you have here, so this would be your extra deck. Now, as for what types of decks you can build out of the structure deck using other cards in the meta or near the meta that can be competitive, at least at a local level and potentially even up towards like regional and whatnot, I think we got 3 good options here. First one and second one are very not cheap. You're going to be spending some money if you want to build these. But number one would be a Snake Eyes variant, just because of the Snake Eyes has a built-in way to search for that Ponix, as well as just being a pretty decent little splashable engine in the meta in general right now. It does fit in here pretty nicely. Here are a couple of lists I found online of the way that this deck seems to be being built at the moment. Now, I didn't test this version of the deck. I've been focused more on the one I'll get to at the end because it's what I'm going to build and take to locals, hopefully this weekend. For number two, I think Horus is just always going to be a good include in just about any deck, especially decks that use the graveyard a lot. Not to mention that this is a rank 8 based deck, and so Horus is a rank 8 based engine, and so you always have that natural synergy there between all the similar levels. And so here is just a quick thrown together idea of how I think I would build a Horus Fire King deck without actually testing it. So once again, if it's an idea you like, test it and play with it. Don't necessarily take this list as something I'm saying is going to work. And then finally, the version of the deck that I am going to build personally will be Fire King Dogmatika. And I like this very much so because Nadir Servant acts similarly to the Snake Eyes engine because it gives you a direct search to Ponix through Garura going to the graveyard off of Nadir Servant, searching your Maximus, activating your Maximus to summon itself, then using its effect to send the Shirag and whatever else you like to get the Shirag search for the Ponix to hand. And it does that for like a couple dollars, whereas a Snake Eye engine does a similar thing for like $160. And so I'm a broke boy, and that's the way I'm doing it. Now, here you go on the screen is the list that I'm currently working around with. A lot of the extra deck is undecided at this point. I think there's some stuff in here that feels like it should kind of work, and it just doesn't. In testing, I just haven't decided on what's getting replaced yet. And to be honest, a lot of that extra deck stuff I don't actually have right now. I got the deck sitting right here, mostly complete, and hopefully I will be able to throw together some form of extra deck, because right now I don't really have much of it. And, you know, locals is in 2 days, so it might be a rough weekend with half an extra deck, and we just got to throw in whatever's left. But we'll make an update video in a couple of days, and you guys will get to see how that went. But that's going to do it for this one. If you guys are going out and building this deck, I hope you guys have great luck. It's been a fun one to play around with. It's got a nice, unique play style. That's always something that's fun to me, is if a deck has a gimmick about itself that feels like it's just for that deck. I enjoy that quite a bit. So with that said, happy deck building. I will see you guys in the next one a couple of days from now, hopefully with a little locals update on my Fire King debut. Have a good one. Goodbye.